Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree. Today's video, we're going to go through all the books I've given 5 stars, and I've also included 4.5 stars in here because I had a few that were right on the cusp of the 5, and I just thought I would include them as well in this video. So I have 20 5-star books to talk to you about, and the way I want to structure this is to go from books that I think are going to be on my top books of the year, and then I'll talk about the rest because in my head, I have 5 stars that I know are going to be favorites, like favorites of the year, they stand out. And then there's 5 stars that happen because the book itself felt like a 5-star, or it was a 5-star in the genre of what I've read. I really enjoyed it for that and not necessarily going to make it on my top books of the year. So before we begin, I want to say that I'm not going to go so in depth with each of these books because there are 20 of them. I don't want the video to be super long. So I'm just going to give you general vibes and why I think it's a 5-star. If you've watched my mid-year freakout tag, this first one will come as no surprise to you, and that is House of Henderson. House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This is a gothic story about a young woman who decides to become a blood maiden to this countess, and basically it's vampires, so she has to give her blood to the countess in exchange for setting her up for life so she won't ever have to worry about money again. And some weird things start happening at the house, and it's just very eerie, spooky. It's also sapphic, so we've got a lot of like obsession as well and just like power dynamics at play, and it was so good. I continue to think about this even now. It's just one of those books that I think was eerily creepy and had a perfect build up and perfect atmosphere that it just really worked for me. So this one will for sure be on top books of the year. Then this might not also surprise you if you watch that video, but I have 2, The Empire of Gold and Kingdom of Copper. These both were 5 stars. It's now a new favorite fantasy series. It's a politically driven fantasy series that's following a young girl, Nari, who is taken from Cairo in like the 18th century or earlier, I can't remember exact date, and she is brought to the city of Daevabad, which is like happening adjacent to the real world, and it's where all the jinn are living, and there's magic and political maneuverings, and a lot of people have a lot of stakes in this world, and you find out along the way each person's motivations, and there's multiple perspectives as well. So you're not just following Nari, you're following a couple other perspectives, and the thing that makes these books stand out to me is really the character work and just the amount of emotion put into it and how I really felt for the characters, and I wanted good things for them, and I wanted to figure out like what was going to happen, and I was just so deeply invested. So these will for sure be on my top books of the year. And then these are a more recent 5-star, but that's Harrow and Gideon. So Gideon's the first one, Gideon the Ninth, and then there's Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. These are sci-fi, like almost fantasy in some aspects, blend of necromancers in space. So they go to another house, which is the first house, and they are competing against other houses to like ascend to godhood, and murder mystery starts happening, and then this one just gets wild. And I just love them. They are so like nothing I've ever read before, and it really blew me away. And this had like everything I wanted in a book. It had humor and mystery and friendship and funny, ridiculous elements and witty banter. So all those things that I love, it had it. And then this one just like blew me away from the formatting and the way that the story is told and how it's all revealed at the end. Sorry, these are super shiny books. But yeah, these I think I just, ever since reading them, I can't stop thinking about them, and so I think for sure these are going to go on the top books of the year. Now we're going to get into books that might or might not be on the top books of the year, but they are definitely 5 stars. So the first one is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. This is the second to the Emily Wilde's series, and we're following in this one them as they go to another city and are trying to figure out some things within the world and fairy lore, and I just love these. I love Emily and Wendell. The reason it might not be on top books of the year is just because I don't think it sticks with me as much as those, because it's like a familiar world, but I still really loved it, and I love Emily and Wendell, and I love just their dynamic and the romance between them, and the also side characters. Like I really liked seeing all the side characters and seeing characters from the first book come to it, and yeah, this was so fun. So this will likely be on top books of the year, but I just don't know if I'm going to read something else that really blows me away. Now, this one is technically a 4.5, but I gave it a 4.5 because I didn't feel like I fully understand the sci-fi aspects of it, but I have not stopped thinking about this book since I read it, and that is How to Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amar El-Motar. And this is like a sci-fi romance in space, and we got time traveling, so they are like spies who like play with time threads, and they write love stories to each other through the different time threads. It's these two women, and they're just like on opposite sides of the war, and it's just beautiful. There's so many ways that they tell each other they love each other that is just so beautiful, and like things I can pick out in this book for the romance. It was just amazing, and I loved it so much, and I really need to do a reread of it because I think I will understand it more and give it a full 5. But I think I've also solidified in my head that it's just truly a 5 star. So This Is How You Lose the Time War. Next is also a very recent 5 star, and that's Notes on an Execution by Daniel Kafka. I read this in a recent reading vlog, which I will link above. I just think that this one will stick with me because of the way it played with how we talk about serial killers and how we talk about death row and all those things. And the perspective of it was so interesting because we're in a countdown from this man who has killed 3 women, and he is going to be killed after 12 hours. So you're counting down, but you get his perspective in a you perspective. So it's talking to you as if you are him, and you're getting his backstory, but you're also getting his life told by these women that are impacted by what he has done. And it was just so well done, so poignant, and I think the conversations it was having just really stuck with me and is something I will think about for a really long time. So I'm really glad I got to this, and it is a sadder 5 star in that it was hard to read and it was dealing with darker things, but I think the conversations around the romanticization and sensationalization of serial killers and forgetting about the victims of it all, I think was so interesting and well done. Now, on a more lighthearted, fun note, we have Jamila Green Ruins Everything by Zarka Nawaz. I also gave this 5 stars in that same reading vlog. This makes me so happy every time I look at it. I know it's dealing with like terrorism and it's talking about a lot of different conversations, but the mode of it through this lens of satire, it just worked so well for me. It was fun while also being poignant, and I think that I would read this over again and have just as much fun. I like Jamila and Ibrahim, the mom, and like their dynamic is just, it was so good and so fun and funny. It like had the heart and fun of like Finley Donovan or Everyone on This Train Has Killed Someone, or Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. I always mix those two up. I don't know why. But it has that same heart and fun to it that those do, but it's also talking about more poignant topics, and I think it just weaved it together really well, and I want to see if more satire works for me because this is the first satire I've really tried, and I really loved it. Oh god. Next we have Una Out of Order by Margarita Montemore. This is a like literary fiction with time travel elements. We're following a woman who can time jump to different parts of her life. So every birthday she turns a year older. So from her 18th she turns 19, but she jumps into her body as if she's like a 40-year-old or a 20-year-old. So she doesn't experience life in a linear fashion. And ever since I've read it, it just stuck with me because there's so many things in here that I just think about, like, well, what would I do in that situation? How would I cope with this? And the decisions she makes, sometimes they're messy, and she just has years where she's just like really going through it, and you see that, but you also see that she has like her future / past self to tell her that things are going to be okay. And also like the idea of you live your life and you can't change the past and you can't change the future. You can only like make the best decisions you can in the moment. And I thought it was really well done, and I just had a lot of like also fun with it because it's not necessarily a fun book, but there are just fun elements in trying to like live Una's life with her. I think was just really stuck with me and really well done. I'm gonna say that about every book because I gave it 5 stars, so I do think they're well done, but just know I'm gonna say that about everyone. Then I read my first grief horror, and that's This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. This is about a man, Thiago, who loses his wife. They start having weird technology things happen in their house with like the smart speaker stuff, and then one day she is killed in an accident, and he starts dealing with his grief, and there's a lot to do with like the smart speaker as well coming alive, and it's just really a sad story about a man who's lost his wife and the grieving process while also adding these horror elements in, and it really worked for me. It was so sad. I have been lucky enough that I haven't lost people very close to me, and this just like really made me feel like the emotions of like what if I lost someone close to me and how that feels for other people. And I just think that this was a very poignant read, and dare I say well done. Then we have kind of a sci-fi thriller, and that is The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. This one was unexpected, for sure. I thought I would like it, but I didn't really know how much because sci-fi and thrillers aren't two of my, like, big genres. But this one blew me away. It's about a woman whose husband has a clone of her. And that's all you need to know. It was really good, and I really, really liked it. And it was fast-paced and, like, went in directions I just had no idea it was going to go. I said this in my reading vlog, but don't read this flap. Just go into it just knowing that, because I think it's so much better if you do, because it's so short. The inside flap, I feel like, gives away too much. So this one, I had such a good time with it, and it wasn't like that, like, twisty-turny where you're, like, on the edge of your seat, but it had so much intrigue in this talk about cloning. I just really enjoyed the conversations and, like, going along with our main character as she's, like, working through all this stuff, and she can be unlikable, but she also has, like, you see why she is the way she is, and I appreciated how much was packed into such a short book. Now we're getting into some of the shorter books, and mainly I feel like these aren't going to be on top books of the year because I don't tend to give short, like, novellas as high of a rating, or, like, I give them 5 stars, but they don't stick with me quite as much as, like, a longer paced book. But this one I have is Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This one is a horror book that's about 2 women, and this woman becomes, like, in love with this woman at a farmer's market stand, and she has never, like, been with women before, and so she's realizing her sexuality and that she could be into women, and so it's about her, like, journey with that, but then this obsession and this weirdness, and just, it gets weirder as the book goes on, and I was here for it. I loved it. I think the atmosphere is perfect if you want something that feels like cottagecore horror, but, like, in a creepy way, like, not in a cozy way. It was so good, and I think about it often as just such a wild ride. Then I don't own this one physically, but I have the Black God Drums by P. Djeli Clark. This is a fantasy. He always kind of blends a little bit of, like, fantasy sci-fi together. It's a novella, and it's about a young woman who sees something in an alley that she's not supposed to see, and she's, like, I want to say, like, 13, so she's, like, really young. She decides she's going to use this to her advantage because she knows something is happening and people need to know about it, but she also wants to get aboard a ship and work. So she goes to this one woman that she wants to be a part of her ship, and she tells her what she saw, and then it's about them trying to outpace these bad people. And it was really good, and I think that he just does novellas so well. I think the pacing was perfect, the character work was perfect, and the, like, mythology that he wove into it I think was so interesting. And I just, like, I don't know, there's something about P. Djeli Clark's writing that gets me every time. It sucks me in, and he can drop you into a world so quickly, and you don't get a ton of world building or a ton of character, but you feel like you do. Like, it's not overly explained, but you feel like you're there and understand it, if that makes sense. That is definitely a 5-star book for me. Then I also have another novella, and that is The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is a retelling of H.P. Lovecraft's story. I don't remember the actual story because I didn't read Lovecraft at all, but I do know that a lot of Lovecraft has been rewritten through a new context because he has a lot of homophobia and racism in his books. And so in this one, we're telling the story of Black Tom, who is a character from the original story that doesn't get a lot of agency and is kind of like this villain character. And so Victor LaValle rewrote this from the perspective of Black Tom and why he does the things he does. For not knowing the original story, I just enjoyed this as a story in itself. The eldritch creature part of it I thought was so interesting because you get, like, this creature that's just, like, otherworldly, and you don't see a lot of it, but you still feel the horror of it. And so I think that the pace of this was perfect, and I enjoyed the character work and, like, what he was saying with the story. And I would just recommend Victor LaValle because I also read Lone Women by him last year, and it was one of my favorite books, so I think he's just becoming a favorite horror author as well for me. So then I have The Lies of the Ajungo by Moses Osei Utomi, and this is a very short fantasy novella. And I picked this up, and I was a little worried because it's, like, not even 100 pages if I was going to love this. And this ended up blowing me away, and I'm very excited to continue the series. It's one of those where it doesn't feel like it's going to have a lot, but it packs so much in. So this is about a young boy who wants to save his area because he lives in the desert and they don't have, like, any water. They have to, like, really fight for all the water they have. And so he decides one day he wants to save his mom and save his town, so he sets off to be a hero. But he's, again, I think, like, 11 or 13, and he's about to lose his, like, ability to speak speak, like they cut out your tongue, and he's still at the age before they cut out your tongue. And so he leaves and he starts meeting people from all over the world and starts to just learn more about the world and his society and why things are the way they are. And it was so good, and I can't wait to see where the rest of the series goes, because I can tell there's so much to this world that this author has thought up that we just haven't got yet. And for this, he did pack in a lot, but I can tell there's so much more to explore, and I'm so excited for it. So this really blew me away. It's one of those where fantasy novellas haven't really traditionally worked the best for me. I tend to want more from them, where horror novellas work really well. So this one, being a fantasy novella, just like blew me away that it could be as good as it was. Then we have a sci-fi novella, and that's Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. This was me trying out sci-fi a bit more because I haven't tried it. It's part of a trilogy, and we're following a young girl, Binti, as she leaves her home, and she's one of the first of her people to go to this school in space, but she knows by leaving her home she never can go back to her home, but she just wants desperately to learn from this school. And it's about her trip to the school, and things don't go to plan, and she has to grow up really quickly, and it's just about her like becoming herself and growing into herself and becoming confident and like figuring things out because shit hits the fan. So yeah, I love this. I was not expecting to love this as much as I did, again, because sci-fi just isn't my genre, but I've been really happy with branching out because I've been finding things that I truly love in sci-fi, and I think this kind of like smaller space story really works for me because you're just following one girl and her life, and like it wasn't so expansive and overwhelming to learn about all these different societies within space. It was just insular to her and learning about her culture, and then slowly being introduced to other cultures, I think just really worked for me. So I can't wait to continue this series, and it's definitely a 5-star. 3 more. I'm going to talk about these 2 together because I feel like I gave them 5 stars for the same reason. And that's Bug Boys and Lightfall by Tim Probert, and this one is by Laura Ketzner. We've got bug boys who are just doing bug adventures and learning about life. And then we have a young girl who is leaving her hometown to find her lost father, and she's with a Galdrian who is like an adventurer that hasn't been seen in a long time. And they just work together, and I think that both of these are 5 stars because of the cozy feels of them. They're so cozy, they're so wholesome, and just the way they handle like growing up and being a kid and like topics like anxiety or like feeling like you're going to separate from your friend and like what happens when you get older. Are you still going to be friends when you're older? Like those kind of topics that kids deal with. I think it just handles them so well, and they're so cute. When I read these, they just like soothe a part of my soul that I didn't know needed it, you know? So that's why these get 5 stars. But I don't think they'll make my top books of the year just because they just are a cozy, like wholesome read and not quite like something I really, really think about all the time, if that makes sense. And the final book I have, which I gave 4.5 stars, is Babel by R.F. Kuang. The only reason this wasn't a 5-star and was a 4.5 was that I just think it was a little long. That being said, I'm not the biggest like long book reader, and so I think that that's just like gonna work for like if you like big fantasy, long fantasy. I think this will work better for you, but I don't feel like I need to say much about this anymore because last year this made like so many people's top books of the year, so you probably heard a lot about it. But we're following a young man as he goes to school at Oxford, and you use language with magic, and he starts to learn about what Britain is doing at Oxford and how he is like aiding in colonialism and all these horrific things that are happening around the world. And he is Chinese, and he was taken from his home and living with this white man. So he has a lot of conflicting feelings about being a person of color in Oxford and benefiting from all this while also like not connecting with his homeland because he's been away since he was like a little boy. So I think it's so well done. The conversations R.F. Kuang was trying to have about colonialism and power and just those type of things, I think just was well done and fleshed out and hit the nail on the head, but I tend to like that. So if you wanted something more subtle, I've heard people say that this was not subtle enough for them, but really, really worked for me. And again, I think that everyone by now has raved about this book, and so I'm not new to the conversation, but it's got my stamp of approval, and I really liked it. So there you go. There are the 25 stars I gave out this year. I would love to know what you've given 5 stars this year and have a conversation about those down below. I just like hearing what everyone's reading, and I really like hearing what everyone's favorites are, and then I tend to pick them up because it makes me excited about them as well. So if you want to leave any of those down below, and if you want to leave a mushroom emoji down below, purely because that's my favorite emoji. I don't get to use it hardly enough because there's not a lot of opportunity for mushrooms, but it's one of my favorites. So if you want to leave that one down below, if you made it to the end, I would love it. And just thank you for watching, and I appreciate it always. So thank you again, and I will see you next time.